Welcome to Clear the Air with me, Angela Lim, medical doctor and co-founder of Clearhead, an innovative employee wellbeing platform. Clear the Air is a podcast covering those experiences in your life or questions you have that you feel too vulnerable to share with those around you, such as, why do I feel so lonely? And what can I do to feel happier? We get real and raw on these existential questions on mental health and well-being that's puzzled humans for millennia, sharing the science behind what you're experiencing and the answers behind those questions. There is never a good reason for bullying and sexual harassment to exist in the workplace. Due to the fear of repercussions towards the victims, these cases are rarely reported, with only 1 in 4 cases estimated to be reported. Shockingly, the perpetrators of these negative behaviours often don't realize they are at fault, and the bystander effect means that their behaviours never get challenged. Additionally, minorities in the workplace tend to be disproportionately affected by this. The first step to creating a psychologically safe workplace for everyone is to understand why and how these negative interpersonal behaviors at work occur and foster new understanding of how to deal with bullying in the workplace. That's why I'm very excited to welcome Ivana Vranjes. She's an assistant professor in Work and Organisational Psychology at Tilburg University in the Netherlands. She obtained her PhD in workplace cyberbullying in Belgium, for which she collaborated with several private and public companies to collect data and develop an understanding of why people misbehave online. With further research projects completed in Canada and Finland on inappropriate workplace behaviours such as aggression, bullying, and sexual harassment. Her current focus is looking at how people who engage in mistreatment at work reflect on their own behaviour in order to break the negative spirals of mistreatment at work. She also brings to the table valuable insights on how technology is shaping the way we work and the impact it has on the way we are communicating with each other.
Thank you so much, Angela. It's a pleasure being here.
Tell us a little bit about why you got started in the space that you did, Ivana.
Yeah, so I started my PhD on the topic of workplace cyberbullying, which was quite a new topic at the time. When I started doing my PhD, that was in 2014. Cyberbullying was it was kind of considered to be a problem of school children. It was, technology. Children use it mostly and they don't know how to use it, so they end up cyberbullying. And for adults, we kind of assume they're rational and they just do things professionally. So it wasn't really assumed to be a problem with adults. But we were seeing as technology was getting used more and more in the workplace that actually it was obviously also being abused from time to time, and that cyberbullying was indeed also happening in the workplaces. So that's basically how I got interested in kind of dark side of human behavior. And that also sparked my interest into more broader forms of aggression and harassment and bullying. So that was kind of the beginning of it all.
Yeah. Well, let's start a little bit broader in terms of, we do live in a world now where technology is everywhere. It almost seems like we can't get a break from technology. So in your research, what have you learned about how technology affects our well-being and also affects the way that we work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is a very complex question that could be a webinar on itself. It's so broad, and what I've learned, especially from my particular interest in how technology is also impacting interpersonal relationships at work, is that the effects of technology are very much paradoxical. We see that technology on the one hand can be such a useful tool that it creates connectivity between people. It actually helps people to feel more connected. It helps them to be more productive, more efficient. So it can be a very useful tool that really allows people to thrive. But on the other hand, it can also be a very isolating tool, which also creates more isolation between people because, let's say, if you work from home a lot, this can be very great for your productivity. But on the other hand, you're also missing out on a lot of human interactions, some informal conversations that also might be informative for your work. So you're also missing out on some information. So technology has kind of two sides. It's a double-edged sword, and it all depends on how you use it. You can use it as a very helpful tool, but it can also become a very big source of stress for people if it's not used properly.
Well, I mean, you touch on probably what is the top three issues for most employers, which is this whole hybrid working and working from home, remote work is difficult in the context that people do enjoy the flexibility it offers them. But at the same time, they feel more disconnected from the culture, they feel less loyal, they feel lonely. So, how would you suggest we find that balance? In your research, what's the right balance in the context that we also want to have our cake and eat it?
Yeah, so what we see is that it's really difficult to find kind of a one size solution fits all because people also have different preferences. I know colleagues, for instance, who really love to work at home and who love kind of that isolation because it makes them more productive. And I also know colleagues who absolutely hate it and they really need a human contact. They really need to see others to be productive as well. Even in my student times, I think it's a difference between students who study in the libraries versus those who study at home alone. So it's important also to have kind of a bit of a flexible approach, I think, because for some people it's really important to be there a lot, but it's also important to allow those people who need that time to focus, let's say, to also be able to do that. So I think it's the most important thing is flexibility in these type of policies. If you have a very rigid policy that doesn't allow people to kind of individualize their kind of preferences, then this is probably going to backfire, and you will have a half of a very satisfied employees, a half of them will be very unsatisfied.
And I think that's where the new world order has occurred, which is that we're so used to personalization now, even with our well-being. There is no one size fits all. And so it's really important to be able to do that in a much more individualized way, but have systems to kind of frame all of these up. So moving forward, then, as you said, there is a dark side, and you mentioned that initially you thought it was only children that did the cyberbullying. So, what does cyberbullying at work with adults look like?
Yeah, there are different ways, and some are more subtle and less conspicuous, and others are really in your face. But it can take various forms. So, for instance, it can be subtle things like people are leaving you out of email chains, so you're missing out on relevant information. This can be, if it's a one-time thing, obviously it's not cyberbullying, but if it really happens repeatedly and you feel like you're always left out, then that can become a really problem for your work. It can also be in more informal channels. If all of your colleagues have like a WhatsApp group or something else where they connect, but you're the only one who's not part of that group, that can also be a form of cyberbullying. But there are also more direct or personal ways of cyberbullying, like when people really, let's say, share embarrassing pictures of you with each other, or post really mean things to you either via email or maybe on social media after work. Um, or even take on your identity online. Let's say they make a fake account in your name, things like that. I've heard some examples that can be quite extreme. Like, for instance, there was this man who was cyberbullied by his supervisor, and she would basically even log into she was able to hack the system and change his hours that he was clocking in, so that it seems like he was arriving late every day while he wasn't. Or things like deleting shared files. So you spent all your like weeks working on a document that's in a shared folder, and then somebody just deletes it, so all your work is gone. I've also heard those examples, or just like joking things like deleting your printing assignments. So like you send something to the printer, you go to collect your things, but then it's canceled by the time you're there. So it seems like a joke, but when it happens a lot, it can really become a very disturbing thing. So people can get very creative, and there are various ways in which this can happen.
And to me, it just sounds crazy that people would do that. I think I mean, have you learned a little bit more about the psychology behind these perpetrators? Why would they do these things? It just sounds so, to me, it sounds very obviously black and white. You shouldn't do this. It
Mhm.
sounds horrible. You wouldn't want it be done to you. So why do these people do this?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And it's also a question that is hard to answer because people are reluctant, obviously, to label themselves as a perpetrator of aggression or bullying or whatever. So if you ask people, are you a bully? They're going to say, no, I'm not a bully. And people have this inherent need to feel like they're a good moral person. So most people also overestimate how good they are or how, righteous and moral and just they are behaving. And so I think what it's important to take into account is that from the perpetrator perspective, let's call them that right now, they often don't see themselves as perpetrator and they often feel like they have a reason for doing what they're doing. There is only a small minority of people, let's say those with the dark triad characteristics, like with a high on psychopathological traits or narcissism, that those individuals are really sometimes doing it almost out of enjoyment and it's almost a game for them. But that's a minority of people. Most normal people or people without the dark triad traits, they think they have some reason. Let's say they feel like this person is underperforming, or they feel like this person is ruining the atmosphere. They don't really like them. They feel like this person has different values than them, and they just clash personality wise. So they always have these reasons in their head how they justify the aggression, and ultimately they feel like either they are justified or that the behavior that they're enacting is not that bad. Like, oh, well, I just made a joke. It wasn't meant to be as bad. Why is this person taking it so personal? We all joke like this, and they shouldn't take it too hard. So I think they often minimize also the impact that their behavior can have on others. So I think that's kind of the key thing. Most perpetrators don't see themselves as perpetrators, and that's very difficult to overcome.
Yeah, and we definitely want to come back to what it means to tackle that, especially in the context that most perpetrators don't actually realize they are causing a problem. But you talked about that this has an impact on the individual being bullied. In this case, can you share with us some of the research on what is the psychological impact on these individuals who have been bullied, and is it short term, is it long term? Like what ends up being the impact to this happening to them?
Yeah, so because aggression is very subjective and the perpetrator is always going to deny or often going to deny. Actually, in research, we often say, well, a person is bullied if they feel bullied because their subjective experience is in that case more important. So if they are experiencing severe psychological trauma, then we consider it bullying and aggression. And what we see is that the effects can be very severe. People develop depressions, people develop burnouts, even symptoms that very highly resemble post-traumatic syndrome. So they can sometimes really experience severe trauma, which can leave them, unable to work, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. And we also see that sometimes it can even lead to suicide attempts. So it is very severe. It's a very important issue that can have severe outcomes. And let's say the person that I gave as an example of cyberbullying, the employee that was cyberbullied by his supervisor, he also ended up trying to commit suicide and failed, and then was even made fun of even more after that, which is absolutely, I also blows my mind that things like that can happen. But the outcomes can be extremely severe and can lead to long-term negative health effects on the victims.
You talked about, individuals experiencing depression, post-traumatic stress and disorder. Obviously these are labels. And sometimes clinical labels, from an individual perspective, whether as the individual experiencing something or whether as someone on the outside observing or noticing, what are the signs they should look out for when that something is wrong and that we need to do something about it. This has gone beyond it's just a joke.
Yeah, so I think one of the things you notice is, for instance, that the person is kind of withdrawing themselves and isolating themselves. So people's response to threat is often to kind of back off and maybe start coming to work less, start working from home more, joining in less with social activities. Not if let's say if people eat lunch together, then they're not showing up, so they're kind of absent, and you see kind of that they're disappearing from the scene. So that could be one of the signs. Also, productivity loss, because stress caused by bullying or aggression can really cause people to be unable to concentrate on their work, so their work really suffers. So if you see that suddenly one of your employees is really underperforming, it's often important to ask what's going on. It can be something also at home sometimes, but it is also possible that maybe there's something going on in the workplace. So it's important really to ask and see what the root cause is, and also to keep probing, because people are reluctant to kind of admit that they're being bullied. It's not really easy for people to self-label as a victim. Most people avoid that label. It feels very painful. I think it really, yeah, makes that bullying even more apparent for them, and it's painful. So they avoid the label, and they also don't want to snitch, let's say, or they worry about how they will be perceived by others, that they will be maybe respected less if they admit they are victimized, or that the others will maybe attack them even more. So yeah, people are reluctant, so you need to kind of keep probing to try to figure out what's going on, if their productivity suffers, if they're withdrawing. Yeah, I think those are important signals.
And I think, it doesn't feel good, right? And I guess it's hard, like you said. People don't want to be snitches. It might even cause them to have more bullying if they do speak up, and especially if the culture is not psychologically safe to do that. What's your advice around, when someone realizes they're being bullied, and obviously you want to stop it as soon as possible so it doesn't perpetuate or escalate in severity. What have you learned are effective ways in which people have been able to successfully end bullying against them?
Yeah, this is a very hard question because unfortunately, a lot of people are unsuccessful in ending bullying. And I think also it's okay to also acknowledge that sometimes the only way is out. Sometimes people just leave their jobs, and I don't think that should be the way. But sometimes when there is no support from the organization, there is no support from the management, your experiences are not being recognized, sometimes it's just the only way out. And we do see that actually for the majority of victims, that is also what happens. But I don't think that should be the way, but that sometimes just is the only way. And I also don't think people should feel ashamed if that is the only way. Then they should just, yeah, do that and hopefully find a more healthy work environment. Because sometimes some dynamics can occur in organizations which are very toxic, and it's very hard for you to battle that as an individual. If you have the resources, if you feel strong enough to do that, then I think you should. But if you feel like you don't have the resources, you don't feel confident enough, you don't feel strong enough to go into that battle, then I think sometimes you have to protect yourself, and you have to protect your mental well-being and your also physical well-being. So yeah, that is what we see happens a lot. When you do feel like you have the resources and you feel you have some power left in you, or some confidence left in you, I think it is something that you can try to address with the supervisors and see if they're somehow responsive to that. Or let's say there might be confidential advisors within your company, so you could also talk to them to see whether they could advise you on the next steps. If confidential advisors are doing their job properly, they should be able to also maybe put some processes, to activate some process, and to put something in place to help you. But that also doesn't always happen. So it is good to try to at least address it, and maybe the supervisor can then mediate some type of conversation with the person who is enacting the bullying, or try to actively work to solve the problem. Sometimes, when they don't have the skills to do that, they might also hire some external advisor, a mediator, somebody who comes in and who tries to help the employees. But as you can see, this requires the organization to actually see that there is a problem and that they are willing to actually try to solve it. And if you don't have that support from the organization, um, actually, what I've also seen work, but also what there's some indication and research that can also maybe work, is that you really focus on yourself and building your own network, and really working towards your goals. Because when you don't give attention to the bullies, sometimes they do stop. If you try to actively approach them and confront them, sometimes bullying gets even worse because they're kind of hoping to get a reaction out of you. So sometimes just building your own kind of goals and working towards your goals and building your network outside of the bullies network, let's say, can actually help strengthen your position in the organization, and ultimately can stop the aggression. Once the bully realizes, oh, you have a good network, oh, and you're actually a very big asset for the company, they cannot hurt you anymore. And that way you're kind of able to protect yourself by, yeah, surrounding yourself with good people, by seeking that social contact instead of withdrawing, which is an automatic response of many people and completely understandable. But it can actually help to try to connect to people who are good, to find those individuals who you do feel supported by, and try to get that kind of support from them and the resources from them. And that can help you to sometimes overcome the bully and their behavior.
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice way to segue into sort of this bystander effect, right? When sometimes we see things happen and we don't say anything because we assume someone else would do it. What have you learned in the research around that, and how can we overcome that?
Yeah, so bystanders are now becoming kind of a popular topic also in aggression research, because the idea is that if we want to really stop bullying or aggression, we need to also make sure that the environment is also doing something, and that they recognize which behaviors are unacceptable in the workplace, and that they also respond to it. So bystander intervention is basically about raising awareness and making sure that all people in the workplace understand that we should not tolerate aggressive behavior. We should not tolerate discrimination. We should not tolerate harassment. And if you see something, you should do something. And I think it's also important to teach bystanders, so basically everyone in the organization, that when something like this happened, you should act. And you might not feel comfortable always confronting the perpetrator, but at least what you can do is support the target. So that's kind of the least you can do, which is a very, let's say, safe strategy for you, because it doesn't put you in any like harm's way. But you could show support for the person who is victimized, which actually is very, very important for them, and can really help reduce negative outcomes for victims. If they feel supported, at least by some people in the company, that can really give them the strength to also keep fighting and to keep, yeah, doing their job and to keep in the company. So yeah, bystanders play an important role, and everybody can be a bystander. And there are trainings that can be implemented to teach people how to respond, to kind of give them the tools, because we see that majority of people actually don't speak up when they see something happening, often because they don't also know how to respond. They don't have the tools necessary to, and they think, oh, probably I should say something, but I don't know what or how. And so these kind of trainings can help people to kind of build those tools to know what type of responses they can enact. And yeah, that can ultimately help also to show to the bully, well, aggression is not tolerated in this type of environment.
And when you talk about training, is that the same as training around conflict resolution? Because it sounds to me like this is a form of conflict, or maybe a more aggressive form of conflict, but a form of conflict regardless, whether the conflict is between the perpetrator and the victim, or whether someone observing the conflict and then, feeling like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. Is it just training around conflict resolution, or would you say it's a different type of training?
It's slightly different because Conflicts differ from aggression in that in a conflict you have two parties which are roughly equal in strength, let's say. So they both have their, let's say, opinions, arguments, or standpoints, and they both are equally strong in their kind of how they feel about it. So in conflicts, you don't always need to involve a third person. Sometimes people can just work it out between themselves. And conflicts can sometimes even be productive when they're task related. So we know from research there's a huge difference between task related conflicts or personal conflicts. So if we disagree about way of doing things, this can actually be quite productive because you can come up with new insights. This can actually help you to maybe come with a more creative solution, and actually can help the organization. But when the conflicts get personal and it's not anymore about the task at hand, but it's about personal attacks and I don't like you and you're like this and you always do that and it becomes very personal, that's where conflicts become toxic and that's where conflicts actually need to end. And that's where you kind of need to halt it. And conflict mediation can help with that. But even there, it's assumed that the two parties still kind of possess kind of equal power, let's say. The difference with aggression or bullying or harassment is usually that we say, well, this is an asymmetrical relationship in which the victim has obviously less power than the perpetrator. And I'm not just talking about formal power, like a position in the organization. It's not necessarily supervisor versus employee, but it can also be social power, like who is more well connected, who has a better reputation, who has more support from other colleagues. So the power can come from many sources. And with aggression, we see that the victim is usually obviously less powerful and unable to defend. And so for them, it becomes really difficult to solve this issue by themselves. And that's where, yeah, when somebody, a third party gets involved, the whole idea is of kind of leveling the field and allowing also the victim to regain some sense of power. And also, the bullying or aggression is always toxic, so it's never good. We never say, well, bullying can be sometimes good and sometimes it can lead. No, research is very clear on that. Aggression is never good for, not for the individual, not for the company, not for other people who observe this type of behavior, because we also know that even bystanders are affected by observing aggression. It creates a very unsafe work environment. So because conflict or bullying are always bullying and aggression is always bad, you always want to end this. You always want to find a way to actually stop this type of behavior. So I think those are kind of the big differences between the two.
I'd be interested to explore with you, because through your research, you also look at it from an organization perspective. What are the things an organization can do systematically that prevents a toxic culture from developing? Obviously, we are always wanting to be prevention first rather than ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
Absolutely. I think the most important thing is to regularly check on the work environment. So this is maybe a surprising finding for people, but when aggression happens or bullying happens, what we find in research, the primary cause of this is high stress. So work environments that are characterized by a high work pressure, a lot of unclarity about tasks, conflicts in your tasks, where you feel like, oh, I need to do this thing, but I also need to do that thing, and I have conflicting tasks. So where people feel very stressed by their work, these are the environments where aggression, bullying, harassment are most likely to occur. So, because I think traditionally people used to assume, well, some individuals are more prone to becoming a bully, or some individuals are more prone to becoming bullied. But what we actually see that it's more in the work environment. Some work environments create kind of a hostile environment in which bullying is more likely to occur. So first fix the work environment. And if you create a more healthy work environment where everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, everybody has also the resources and the means of doing their job, these environments will be less likely to have bullying occur in them. So organizations can check this and can regularly check how are people doing, how is their work pressure, are their tasks clear, do they know what they have to do and how they have to do it, do they have the means to do that. So they can check that well with kind of yearly surveys, but also during the yearly, let's say, evaluation conversations with your employees, the managers can also probe into that, or the human resources, whoever is conducting these interviews, they can also check and ask people, do you feel like you're able to do your job properly? Do you have the tools you need to do it? And by doing that, if you are able to create a healthy work environment in that sense, you're already doing a big job in preventing aggression from occurring. So I think that's kind of the first step.
That's such a powerful insight, just reminding people that, like, it's actually the other psychosocial risks, like workload, like job clarity, job role clarity, all those things are driving the symptom, which is bullying, rather than the other way around, which sometimes people think is like, oh, it's the bully that's causing my workload to be terrible. But actually, it's more just people when they are in an environment where they're not coping, they develop unhealthy coping behaviors, and bullying is an example
Exactly.
of that. And you actually briefly mentioned on this around, you know, having bullying, well, having this be a part of the annual reviews. And so, your performance reviews, and in some case performance management for some individuals who, this is something that people have noticed, whether that's the manager or colleagues reporting. So what do you recommend then having that be part of the performance manager, the performance review, and it will be effective in tackling the bullying, is what you're saying. Is that right?
I think it's part of the solution for sure. I think it needs to be implemented there. But once again, you need good supervisors who are conducting this, or good human resource officers. So I also think that another important thing here is that you make sure that people who are conducting this are also doing proper job in doing so, because I think we have all had these experiences where we have these evaluation conversations and we leave the room feeling like, what was this all about? Or I didn't get anything out of this, or this wasn't helpful at all. So I think also proper training for people conducting these interviews is absolutely crucial, because these type of conversations often do not happen properly. They are not really qualitatively great, so they also then miss, on the goals that they're trying to achieve. So they're not really achieving what they should be achieving. So I think, yes, these conversations are important, but they need to be also properly conducted in order to actually have an effect.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? With any sort of sensitive conversation, it's you want to create more good than harm. And sometimes if you say things in a way that is not supportive, it might actually cause more harm than good. And I can say, like, working in the hospitals, we're constantly under resourced on our end, and it's really helpful to kind of actually notice now that actually it's because of the workload, the under resourcing, that's why we hear about how all the bullying that happens in healthcare. And actually, if we tackle and create right working environments, the bullying will hopefully go away as well, especially once you create managers and leaders that know how to deal with these issues when they get brought up. I'd love to actually go a little bit deeper, I guess. So we've been sort of dancing around bullying and aggression at work, but obviously some of the areas that you've done research in is in the context of sexual harassment. So how does that situation happen? Is it again it depends on individuals, or is there something bigger that happens in the work environment?
Yes, so sexual harassment, very complex issue, and a lot of it has to do with, it's almost like a power struggle between people of different genders or gender orientations. And we notice that sexual harassment tends to happen most in fields that are, let's say, either mainly male dominated, and where, let's say, women are in the minority, those women will, for instance, be most likely to experience harassment. Or in very traditionally masculine environments, let's say like army or police, here we also see that, for instance, harassment is also more likely to occur, not only against women, but also against other men. But even in, let's say, if it's a very female dominated occupation, it can also occur, of course, other way around, where men could become victimized because they're in the minority. But in this moment, we do see that it mostly occurs with the male perpetrator against the female victim. That's kind of the most prevalent type of harassment. I think it's over 80% of times it's that form of harassment. And the second most prevalent is men harassing other men, which is also surprising, I think, for many to hear. And then only then it follows women against men and women against women, which are very minority of cases. So often it seems like it's power motivated. So there seems to be this necessity of people to put others in their place if they feel like they don't belong somewhere. So let's say if it's a very masculine context, people working there may feel like this woman does not belong there. She shouldn't be there. This is not the context for her. And harassment is almost used as a way of kind of showing this dominance and showing to this person they don't belong and that they shouldn't be here. So it's often used as a kind of a power tool as well. So I think that's one of the important things, and of course, there's also a lot of ignorance at play. I think people have also a lot of misconceptions about what is harassing behavior and what is appropriate behavior, and I think some people also just do it out of ignorance. These are the more easier cases because you can more easier correct it more easily. But yeah, those power dynamics also are very important, and those are a bit more challenging to tackle.
You talk about sort of, the power dynamics, and, what we know is perpetrators are generally in position of power. In fact, 83% of workers who experience workplace bullying or harassment report that their perpetrator was a manager or a supervisor or a director. How do you then sort of advise when people know that if they go against the power dynamics, they might personally be affected in terms of their career progression? Are there anything else you'd advise beyond what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, so this is, it's often it often happens from more powerful people to less powerful people, and this is why we see that majority of people who experience this type of behavior never even report it. So the cases that we actually hear about are a severe underrepresentation of what is actually going on, because in most cases people just don't feel safe enough to speak up, and this is a huge issue. It is becoming a little bit better with raised awareness now and in media and everything. On the one hand, this has helped also some victims to speak up. So now organizations are starting to realize that this can be very harmful for them, for their reputation, if this happens. So they are starting to do more about it. So that's kind of like a beginning. On the other hand, I've also seen a lot of backlash effect from all the attention that has been given to the topic, where people are actually now even more inclined to say that it's all exaggerated and that all the victims are making it up and it's all attention. So that's also a huge issue, I think, because we also have a lot of people who are actually denying that this problem even exists. So for victims, on the one hand, depending on who's in charge in their organization, if they address the behavior, either they will be heard and this will be taken very seriously, or they will be completely silenced and they won't be taken seriously at all. So, for instance, what we advise also in our research, we do think it's important that there are reporting systems for victims outside their organizations as well. And in some countries, this is already happening. So in the Netherlands or in Belgium, where I have also been working, there are these type of external agencies where you can report this type of behavior, which then come and they independently assess the situation. And they also have some authority to impose some sanctions onto organizations if they are not complying. So I think this is very important, because they're just sometimes it will just be impossible for victims to really address the issue within their organization, because of the social network structures, because everything is interconnected. And if the perpetrator is a more powerful person, the organization will be automatically more inclined to protect their kind of more valuable asset than this powerless victim who maybe is new, inexperienced. So their instinct sometimes to say, well, this perpetrator is more important to us because they have already brought us so many your resources. They are so important for the functioning of the organization. So they sometimes tend to protect the perpetrator. And so that is why it's important to also have some external means of addressing this behavior, such as this type of external watchdog agencies, which can then also come in and then investigate and also impose some sanctions if necessary. So I think this is very crucial because otherwise it just becomes sometimes impossible for victims to address this within their own organization.
Yeah, and I guess, obviously it's great when we start seeing countries sort of take a more regulatory approach to this and putting external agencies in place so that, as citizens, we feel there are places that we can go to outside of our workplace. But also, most companies, and especially these things often happen in bigger companies where there's a little bit more room to hide. Often these larger organizations do have in place what we call EAP, or Employee Assistance Program. These are almost always third-party providers. Clearhead is one of them. So, there are avenues in which you can basically whistleblow, basically, in terms of asking for help and have, the organization sort of step in from a external party trying to mediate the situation. Of course, also we've talked a lot about the impact on the individual as well as bystanders. So if at any point you are struggling with your mental health because of something like this going on for you right now, again, if your company has an EAP like Clearhead, you can get professional support as well. And so just wanting to note that don't suffer in silence. It's not worth it. The impact can be very long lasting if you wait for a very long time to get that help. Along those lines, then, it'd be interesting to explore, and I don't know if you can comment on this, Ivana. You mentioned that obviously it's a bit of a backlash. It's swung the other way. People are now saying that, these victims are making it up. And the whole trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, I'm not sure if you followed it from a research lens at all. It was almost a trial by social media, and there were people who were saying that Amber Heard made it up, and obviously Johnny Depp was more socially popular because of the movies that he's done, etc. So, be curious to hear if you have any insights you could share around from that trial basis, and how that is translatable in an everyday work situation.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I think all of us followed this globally. It was really fascinating to watch. I don't dare to make any claims about who was in the right or the wrong here because I don't know what happened. So I'm not gonna take sides and say, well, I'm for sure that Amber was a victim, or I'm sure that Johnny was a victim. But I do want to stress that there is this big misconceptions that victims often lie about harassment. It is one of the most prevalent and most difficult myths to kind of dispel because people are really convinced about it. And it has to do with what we in psychology call the availability bias. So, when certain information is readily available in your mind, you tend to overestimate kind of the probability of that event occurring. So it's a similar with why people fear airplane crashes more than they fear car crashes. So statistically, you have a way larger chance of actually experiencing a car crash than an airplane crash. Yet people are more afraid of an airplane crash than a car crash. every time you step into your car, you don't think, oh my God, I might die today, or there's something might happen today. You just do it. You don't even think about it. Because it happens so much, it's not really reported on a lot anymore because it's such a common occurrence. While when an airplane crashes, it's like heavily, publicized. It's everywhere, all over the media, because it's a rare occurrence. So it's very interesting, it's intriguing, and it's sensational. And so people read about it everywhere, and then they overestimate the chance of that also happening to them. The same happens with these type of claims of harassment. They are the false claims are very rare. So we see from research it's between 2 or 10% of cases which are false, let's say, with over 90% of reported cases actually being true. So this means overwhelming majority. So statistically speaking, the chance of somebody making it up is extremely low. And actually there is a way higher chance of people not reporting harassment when it actually happened than falsely reporting harassment. But when these cases happen, they become so heavily publicized. There's so much media attention given to them that people just tend to overestimate the chance of that happening, and then say, see, all these women are lying because in this case it was proven that it wasn't right. So then, most people lie. So they tend to heavily overestimate the rate of false claims. So that is why I think also in the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case, I don't know what really happened. I don't know what the truth was. But the fact that she lost this case is again a confirmation for a lot of people. Oh, see, false claims happen all the time. But this was just one heavily publicized case. And this is just one of these occurrences that actually don't happen that much, but it has gained so much worldwide attention that it's creating even more this availability bias of, harassment claims are often false, and false claims occur on a regular basis. So I think for organizations and supervisors, it's absolutely critical to keep in mind that if a claim is laid in their organization, statistically speaking, there is a high chance that this is really true, and they should always take every claim seriously. So every claim should be investigated and should be taken seriously because there is a high chance that it's really true. Obviously, they need to investigate it, they need to see what's going on, but they should take every claim very seriously. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
That's a great reminder, and if that's one lesson that we've learned, and thank you for sharing the cognitive bias that exists behind why we make the judgment calls that we do. Along those lines, this is something that I've often heard. So, as a young woman, I was very lucky to have mentors and opportunities given to me to allow me to be where I am today. And because of the power structure, most of those leaders, most of those mentors were men. And I have benefited from, the gender inequality being sort of, proactively addressed from my individual case. But with more and more of these issues around sexual harassment coming up, and men are almost opting out. They're like, if I offer to mentor this woman, they might say I'm sexually harassing them, and they feel uncomfortable, and they just don't even want to what they call open this can of worms. And so then it actually backfires on women to not get the opportunity, to not get the mentorship. And be good to hear your perspective on how to get that balance right, because I think it has swung the other way where now men is just choosing to opt out.
Yeah, it really saddens me because it really is happening. I've heard it even personally. I've heard colleagues say, well, I don't dare to now have meetings with female students because it might, turn out bad. They might accuse me of something. And indeed, also people saying, I don't want to, like in my field, academic field, like I don't want to supervise a female PhD student because this is just going to create extra hassle for me. So it really saddens me that this is indeed happening. I think once again, this has to do with this kind of false belief that, these type of claims happen all the time, that women do it out of kind of vendetta vendetta or revenge. These are very prevalent myths that are, very harmful and also very wrong. And I think we need to really keep reminding people that this is really a rare occurrence and this is not something that happens on a daily basis. If you just, behave as a normal human being, like nothing will happen. I think people just need to realize, like, nobody is going to just make up, this inappropriate, interaction. If you offer them a cup of coffee, they're not going to say, "Oh, you're harassing me." So if you just behave professionally, in a professional way, in the professional settings, like everything will be fine. So I think we just need to keep reminding people that, this is really not something that happens so often. But I think also we need to listen to these concerns. So instead of just becoming very defensive and saying, "No, this is not true, what are you talking about?" I think we need to listen and understand their concerns, because this is also rooted in all this, publicity and bias. And I think we also have to show understanding for their perspective and their fears. Although we might think that they're irrational, I think they are there. So we need to kind of address them. I think it's very important for women and men in the workplace to, show understanding for each other's perspective, and, work together to talk about these issues. And, instead of seeing this almost like a sort of gender war, which is, I think, now sometimes becoming like a thing, like it's almost men versus women, and, oh, men are all bad, and oh, women all make harassment up. I think we really need to find like a middle ground and be more understanding for each other's kind of fears and worries, and just have constructive conversations about it. So when I hear a colleague of mine say things like this, like, "Oh, I don't," I just ask them, "Okay, where is this fear coming from?" I understand, but I also try to explain to them that this really doesn't happen, on a regular basis. So it's not about like trying to completely attack their point of view, and but just try to understand where it's coming from, and also try to then convince them with reason. Also, that we have a lot of statistics on this. I mean, we know that it's very rare, so I try to use these type of arguments, but also try to understand their also perspective and emotions that they're experiencing at that point.
Yeah, and I think actually, yes, and we know from the research that actually humans, they actually remember stories rather than statistics. So yes, we can come with the rational brain and we can tell them that, this is very rare. Here, it's a 0.2% or whatever the statistic is. And, but actually, I think the other way to frame it is as well as reminding them, like, actually, I've benefited from people not being afraid to buy me a cup of coffee and sit down and talk to me and give me advice. And here's how I've taken that advice and gotten this place. So it's almost reminding them the reward is much, much greater than the risk that they perceive they have. So I think that's probably one way in which we can tackle some of the legitimate fear that is out there, and if anything is growing as more and more social media and media attention is raised on this. I guess one final question for me is you mentioned gender wars, and actually when we think about discrimination, it's often affecting people of minority, and so that includes ethnic minority. And you think about Black Lives Matter, and one of the things that in the context of bullying, harassment, aggression against minorities, how do people navigate that this line is evolving, right? Like what used to be acceptable, like smoking in the office, is no longer acceptable today. So, these lines of what would previously not be considered discrimination or harassment or bullying is now considered the case today. So how do you help people navigate the shifting lines?
Well, I'm not going to pretend like I'm always doing everything right. I'm sure that I've accidentally discriminated before, or that I've done things. I think that's also kind of the core of it. I might have been a perpetrator in the past before without realizing. So I think it's important that we all just also realize that it's okay to also make mistakes and just learn from them, instead of just being afraid all the time of doing the wrong thing. If we just keep an open mind and accept that mistakes will happen along the way, as long as I'm willing to learn from them and accept when things don't turn out the way I wanted, that maybe I should learn from that experience. I think that that's most important. So yes, things are changing, the norms are changing, and this is challenging even for me sometimes. Things, the type of behaviors that also even for me used to be like, oh, this is collegial, and now it's like, no, you don't do that. So it's a learning curve that we are all going through, and we will make mistakes along the way, and it's okay. And I think we just all have to be a little bit more accepting of also each other's mistakes, as long as we are willing to also adapt and learn from them. So instead of immediately saying, oh, you're a bad person for doing that, just, this is what happened, and I see that you had good intentions, but the result was maybe not the best. That can help, also people to learn from their mistakes and to adapt more flexibly. So I think we just need to accept, that it won't always go great. We'll make mistakes along the way.
And I think, again, it's like, when things are not right, or when you don't feel good when someone does something to you, don't immediately assume malice, right? In fact, assume ignorance. Ignorance is more likely to have caused the action than pure malice. And I think what we're saying as well is, don't do cancel culture. It's not helpful for anyone, but actually create an environment where people can give honest and open and honest feedback, and for that feedback to be accepted without being defensive, and then and to create a culture where people feel safe to give that feedback, and people feel safe to receive that feedback as well, because otherwise, if you don't have that, then you can't move forward. Maybe just as a final piece of advice, what are some successful strategies or programs you've seen implemented that have effectively reduced incidents of bullying or harassment or aggression that you've seen?
Well, bystander trainings are becoming more implemented. They're helpful because they don't send the message to people that, oh, you might be a potential perpetrator. Instead, they send the message to people, you might be a potential hero. And that's a way nicer message for people to receive than pointing fingers at them and saying, you might do something wrong one day. So we're going to teach you how not to do something wrong. So instead, teaching people how to do right is a more positive message. But also, I think leadership is important. I think organizations need to realize that hiring leaders not only on their hard skills but also on their soft skills is crucial. Leaders that know how to manage people, that know how to show empathy and know how to recognize what's happening in their team are way more successful in also creating a healthy team. So I think keeping in mind that promoting people based on people skills is just as important as promoting them on purely their output or their productivity.
Yes, I think people often forget that management is a skill in itself. And rather than just be like, oh, that person is a great coder or that person is a great marketer, so we will promote him to be the marketing lead. And actually people forget that people management is a real skill. Actually, again, a lot of the challenges that people have in the context of this is just poor leadership and management skills that hopefully can be taught as well. Well, thank you so much for your time. We love to end these sessions with one final question, and we ask all our guests. What is your one wellbeing practice, Ivana, that help you stay mentally well?
I really try to also have fun outside my work. So for me, it's really important to detach from work, to do also some fun hobbies, and to people think that if they work all day, they'll be more productive, but it's not true. You deplete your resources. So you really need to take times to also detach, relax, do something else, and you will be more productive as a consequence and more healthy. So for me, I think that's the key. Taking time for myself also outside of work. It's very important.
That's cool. What do you like to do when you're having fun outside of work?
So I've tried a lot of hobbies. I'm currently doing dancing classes in the evening, which is absolutely, it's impossible to think about work when I'm trying to think about which steps I need to make. So it's perfect for detachment. So, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. You can't bring your phone with you answering your emails while you're dancing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it for today's episode. If you want to find out more about us, visit clearhead.org.nz. Love our content? share it with a friend, or leave us a comment on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. If you want to learn more about how Clearhead can support your workplace, or you have a burning mental health question that you'd like us to explore on the podcast, you can reach us at contact@clearhead.org.nz. Thank you so much again for listening, and catch you on the next one.